Okay, so let's talk about this new Gillette advert. What went wrong in this marketing campaign?
Bullying.
The Me Too movement against sexual harassment.
Masculinity.
Is this the best a man can get? Is it? We can't hide from it.
Sexual harassment is taking over.
It's been going on far too long. We can't laugh it off.
Who's the daddy?
What I actually think she's trying to say.
Making the same old excuses.
Boys will be boys. Boys will be boys. Boys will be boys.
But something finally changed.
Allegations regarding sexual assault and sexual harassment.
But she says
And there will be no going back. Because we believe in the best in men.
Men need to hold other men accountable.
Smile, sweetie.
Come on.
To say the right thing. To act the right way.
Bro, not cool, not cool.
Some already are. In ways big
Yo, men,
and small.
I am strong.
But some is not enough.
It's not how we treat each other, okay? Okay.
Because the boys watching today will be the men of tomorrow.
This ad has had tons of outrage on social media. It's had loads of news coverage. The likes to dislikes ratio on YouTube is very telling of how people have reacted to it. And I wanted to do a little bit of a analysis of what I think happened from a marketer's perspective. So one of the biggest issues I think this advertising campaign has is the message to marketing mismatch. Now, as a marketer, essentially whenever you put together an advert or any piece of communication that's meant for your marketplace, you want to craft a really meaningful message and you want to make sure it goes to the right market. Right, so in this case, Gillette crafted their message, which is the best men can be, right? And the market is men, or anybody really who buys their razors. Now, when this is done right, I mean, the result is incredible. Great marketing legitimizes brands, right? It makes you see a product as more than the sum of its parts, right? This is why people will pay $100 for, a pair of Nike trainers, and they'll only pay $10 for a knockoff that may look exactly the same and be constructed of the same materials, right? It's because Nike's marketing and their brand has a real story behind it. People buy into that concept and therefore it drives up the value of the product and obviously increases sales. So with the right message to market, advertising can be really powerful. But something with this advertising campaign clearly didn't work out the way Gillette intended to, or at least I don't think this was what they wanted to happen. Right, so let's talk a little bit about what I think they were aiming for with this campaign. Then we'll talk about how people perceived it. And then we'll talk about what happened as a result of that. So I think Gillette will try to put out a message that does two things. Number one, it talks about the positive changes we're seeing in men today. Right, you can see that from the advert with the way that, the guy was attempting to raise his child, right, in a positive way to stop him from bullying other kids. Also, in that, they were showing it's okay for kids to show their emotions, right? This is an example of the good things that men are doing at the moment. But also, I think they were trying to say that some men are doing very bad things at the moment in some situations. Some men are making mistakes, whether they're very big mistakes that led to, things like the Me Too movement with sexual harassment, or slightly less serious issues such as minor bullying and, workplace related stuff. Right? I think this is what they were trying to do, highlight the good things and the good way men are supposed to be, and also reflect on the bad. Unfortunately, What I think happened was the advert was interpreted almost by a lot of people as an attack on men, as an attack on masculinity, right? It kind of seemed like Gillette was saying, look, all men are broken and, you know, it's okay because we're Gillette and we have the answers for how to fix you. Now, I don't think this was their intention with creating the message, but I think this is how it's been interpreted by a lot of men and by a lot of Gillette customers. And overall, I think this has annoyed a massive portion of their target market. So as a result of that, you've now got a message which has angered tons of people, right? That's been put into the marketplace, and this has created this explosion of outrage on social media. So the big question is, why did this anger the marketplace so much? I think it's because the message inherently was unclear. It was unclear who Gillette was putting the blame on. Was it a small section of men? Was it all men? Was it just the men who were, you know, committing crimes involved in the Me Too movement? Was it all dads? From the montage of imagery we had in the advert, like, the answers to these questions aren't 100% clear. That's why I've seen so many posts on social media from people with completely different interpretations of what this advert was actually trying to say. So that means there's a big problem with the message, right? If your message can be interpreted in that many ways, then you either weren't clear on what the message was, or you were clear, but then the way you presented it to the world was unclear. So this is all Gillette's fault, and they're going to have to do something to rectify this if this message damages their brand. Now, is this actually going to have an effect on their sales? Well, that's hard to say, right? A lot of people are saying they're going to boycott Gillette. People don't vote with their posts on social media, they vote with their wallets, right? How many people do you know say they prefer going into the theatre to see a play over going to the cinema? Well, most people will probably say that, but if you look at their bank statement, they've probably spent way more on going to the cinema than they have going to plays over the past 6 months, right? So the same thing's going to happen with Gillette. Loads of people are saying they're going to boycott it. Whether they will or not, I guess only time will tell over the next few months, possibly over the next few years. We certainly can't look at the stock market and see like a sudden dip, if there has been one recently, to determine whether this ad campaign has had a negative long-term effect on the brand. By talking about toxic masculinity, right, now you've got a multinational corporation who are taking a stance on a political issue in order to sell their stuff. Now, anytime a corporation does this, you're playing with fire, right? Anytime any marketer touches on anything political, you're playing with fire, right? I mean, sometimes it can go really well, and sometimes it creates outrage that actually leads to positive results for your company. Namely, after the whole Colin Kaepernick example with Nike, apparently there's been a 31% increase in sales after the campaign. So yes, people were burning their trainers and cutting up their socks in protest to the ad, but all that seemed to do is create more buzz about Nike as a brand, and overall the campaign worked. But in some cases it can massively backfire, like what happened with the Pepsi ad with Kendall Jenner, right? Pepsi were pretty much exploiting social and cultural issues like racial abuse, police brutality, and big protests, and then just slapping their product in the middle of all this stuff to try and ride that wave to increase sales. Obviously what resulted from that is massive outrage and a negative effect on the brand, which actually it led to one of the senior people at Pepsi stepping down from their position. If you involve any sort of politics in your advertising campaign, something somewhere is going to explode. So because of the way this message was interpreted from the Gillette ad, as a result of that, it's angered the marketplace massively. Now, whether they've interpreted it the way it was supposed to be interpreted or not is completely irrelevant. Right? At the end of the day, if you as a marketer put out a message and the marketplace interprets it wrong, that's your fault, right? It's your responsibility to make sure people perceive the ad in the way you've put it out. That's what it means to actually create a good piece of marketing material, right? To understand the effect it's going to have on your target market. I don't think Gillette realized that this was what was going to happen when they released the ad campaign. I certainly don't think this is the result they wanted to create in the world, and I don't think this is the way they wanted to build a buzz about their company. So what can we learn from this as marketers, right? Well, as a company, really, when you're creating a piece of marketing material, your number one focus should be around empathy, right? You should be trying to empathize with your target market. Get inside their heads, understand them, right? And once you've done that and you understand who you're trying to reach, right, then you've got to create a message that they can get behind. So they've got to understand exactly what you're saying, how you're saying it, interpret it in the right way, and then they've got to get behind it. Obviously with the Gillette ad, this didn't happen. When you're creating marketing messages, always test them out in front of somebody who's going to give you their honest emotional reaction to that message. And ideally, you want someone from your target market to react to the message, because this is who you want the message to reach at the end of the day, right? So, this doesn't mean show the advert to your mum, right? Because no matter what it is, they're going to say, it's wonderful. Show it to someone who will have a genuine reaction. Test it small before you let loose on the world, right? Clearly, somewhere along the line, Gillette failed to test this in a small way properly, or perhaps they did test it and they just ignored some of the results, or maybe they tested it with the wrong people. Remember, if you test like any message with a very, very small segment of your marketplace, it doesn't necessarily reflect how the rest of the marketplace is going to perceive the message, right? So good testing is like super important before you unleash a massive advertising campaign on the world. Now, when you're creating your message, it's actually okay to offend people, right? As a marketer, pretty much no matter what you do, just by putting a message into a marketplace, you are going to offend people on the way, like you always will. I think it was Dan Kennedy who said, if you haven't offended somebody by 12 noon every day, then you're not marketing hard enough. And I could not agree more with that statement. But you never just want to cause offense and outrage just for the purpose of doing so, right? You want to do it in such a way that most of your target market, at the very least, can get on your side and actually agree with your message. Now, to put this into perspective, one of the best advertising campaigns of all time was one of Apple, right? They did the Mac versus PC campaign. Now, they could have tested this, right, on several people, and they would have got loads of different reactions, right? If you played this campaign to somebody who's into Macs, they would probably be really on board with it. If you played it to someone who's super into PCs and really doesn't like what Apple are doing, they're probably going to get offended. Some people in certain circles, right, who are sort of really into their computers, probably be outraged. So you will create outrage, you will create, offense like Apple have done, but because so much of their target market really bought into that message, the fact that they polarized the marketplace of people who are into computers didn't matter. Because you got this really powerful us versus them effect of the Mac people versus the PC people, and the Mac people are more and more bought in to the company because of that advert. Right, so you can cause outrage, you can cause offense, but you have to do it in a way that's well directed and that lets your company win at the end of the day when all the dust settles. Perhaps Nike and their campaign was an example of this actually working in practice. Don't jump on the bandwagon of a social issue just to sell your product. Like, pretty much no matter how you do this, it's always going to feel slightly incongruent, especially if you're a multinational corporation, right? And especially if you kind of have nothing to do with the social issue. Now, the Me Too movement, right, which is really the topic of this Gillette ad, it definitely had to happen, right? It was a very, very powerful movement reflecting on some real issues that women are facing in the world, right? No, I don't think many people will argue with that. However, what people will argue with is Gillette jumping on the bandwagon and trying to make profit from this movement. Something about it just feels off, it just feels icky, and it just doesn't feel congruent. Like Gillette, they're not a non-profit company, right? They're a corporation, and their number one aim is to make profit. And you know what? Making profit is fine. Like, the whole reason you build a business is to make profit, but just be real about it, right? You're selling razors, so sell razors, right? Talk about how amazing your product is. Build a story around your brand that actually involves your product. I think people just find it hard to believe that such a massive corporation like this, with 30,000 employees that outsources their advertising to an agency, all has the same uniting vision about their opinion on social issues. Feels a lot more like show-offy bandwagon jumping just to create a buzz, and through, as an effect of that, sell more of your product. Now, that's not to say that, you know, corporations are evil and they never believe in causes. If you want to involve a cause in your marketing campaign, awesome. But don't just create an advert with some loose platitudes about it. Go out there and support the cause. In fact, you can see that Red Bull did a fantastic job of this in their campaign when they wanted to support space travel, right? Instead of just creating an advert where they said, you know, you should be focusing on becoming astronauts, right? They just went to space. And therefore, this was one of the most successful advertising campaigns for a company that didn't even involve an advert. And finally, I think this is the most important message we can take away from Gillette's marketing campaign. As a marketer and as a company, always be self-aware. Understand how people perceive you. Because no matter how concise your message is, people will perceive you in a certain way, they'll perceive your motives behind the message, and then that will warp what the message really means and affect how well it actually connects with your target market. For example, if you're like a vegan food company, right, it probably wouldn't make sense for you to put out an advert on how to cook the perfect steak, right? Because we would know that it's not necessarily your area of expertise, right? We have a warped perception of what the message really means because we know who you are. Unless, of course, there was some irony involved in there, and again, you were self-aware of who you were as a company, and you did that deliberately. We see Gillette as part of Proctor and Gamble, right? The multinational corporation. Because of this perception we have of the company, this means that any message they put out will have a perception of the motives behind the message that they're looking to put into the public. And in this case, that it's pretty clear the only motive they're really looking to get from this entire campaign is profit. And again, nothing inherently wrong with that. But because this is clearly their motive, what it does is it adds another layer of incongruency to their message. And it seems to me that Gillette didn't really take this on board when they were putting together this campaign. So, to wrap this all up, great marketing is all about good message to market, making sure those two things match. Probably best to avoid being too politically motivated unless you want to create tons of outrage in your marketplace. Be self-aware, because at the end of the day, if you don't know who you are and how people perceive you, your message isn't going to land the way you want it to. Then if you have all this stuff in place, you definitely can put messages out there to build a story around your brand, right? Create a connection with your audience, right? Even if it offends some of them, it doesn't really matter, right? As long as your target market gets what you're all about. And ultimately, this will enable you to sell tons more of your product or your service. All right, hope you found this video insightful. Maybe you've learned something, and I'll catch you very soon.